and welcome to Fairy Tales and Fangs. This time we will be discussing Little Red Riding Hood as a coming-of-age story, and we will be highlighting Season 3, Episode 12 of Buffy, Helpless. Content warning, there are some brief discussions of sexual harassment, so please take care of yourself and make the choice that is best for you. When I was 18 years old, a freshman in college, I stayed very late at a friend's house watching a show about, what else? A world full of fairy tales and ballets made real through the power of storytelling. On my way home, I passed under the elm trees of the yard between our dorms, struggling with tired fingers to button up the red fleece coat that my grandmother had given me for Christmas. Really, she did give me this red fleece coat for Christmas. And I was also clutching tight the tote bag that I had brought for movie night that was full of snacks, when all of a sudden I heard, "Hey, Little Red!" My breath caught in the cold air, and my heart fumbled its next beat. A group of 3 men stood just off the path on which I was treading. I bolted the remaining yards between myself and the door to my building. "Hey, Little Red, let us come in," I heard them jeer, but they did not pursue me. Even as I ran, I saw the irony of the moment, the story within the story. It is often easier to live for a moment as a character in a story than to feel the alone in your scary moment and feel its full effects. The story gives you a path to follow, even if it comes with warnings and darkness attached. Little Red is everywhere in pop culture, potent with symbolism and easily recognizable. She is the red-cloaked handmaiden in Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale. She is a cutesy illustration in the children's section of a bookstore. She is everything a big bad wolf could want. She can be so many things to so many different audiences about the perils of that liminal space between girlhood and adulthood. We also see prolific Little Red Riding Hood imagery throughout Buffy the Vampire Slayer and the Angel series. It's not surprising because so many of the aesthetic ingredients to Little Red are part and parcel to Buffy. A young girl waltzing through the woods late at night, a penchant for wearing red coats, a friend who sometimes turns into a wolf, and monsters just off the path. Buffy even dresses up as Little Red Riding Hood for Halloween in Fear itself, in an episode that also sees Oz turned into a wolf outside of the full moon. In Phases, Red-Headed Willow, at first glance appears to be the Little Red to Oz's new wolf form. But in these examples, the use of Little Red aesthetically is usually meant to invert the story. In Phases, for example, Oz is not the predator who has been stalking people in the night. It's actually Angelus. And in Fear itself, Buffy is still her usual strong warrior self, and unlike the conniving wolf in Little Red Riding Hood, the demon they face is all bark and no bite. But in Helpless, we see the most explicit retelling of Little Red Riding Hood in the Buffyverse. And this time, we get not only the aesthetic markings of Little Red tales, but the little red heart of the tale's themes and meanings beneath it all. Fairy tales have been on the gang's mind recently. One episode before, they faced chaos caused quite literally by the demons who, we learn, first spurred the original Hansel and Gretel fairy tale into existence. Some regional fairy tales have literal antecedents, Giles says. "I'm still spinning on this whole fairy tales are real thing," notes Xander. As Buffy nears her 18th birthday, she has even more reason to think about childhood tales than since she is living them out, here in that liminal cusp between childhood and adulthood.
Little Red Riding Hood has just been given a new adult responsibility, walking through the woods alone to deliver food to her ailing grandmother. She's old enough at last to walk through the woods alone, wearing a brand new red coat that can be seen as symbolic of her initiation into womanhood. She is quite literally stepping out into the world, faced with decisions, path of pins, path of needles, and the adult responsibility of caretaking elderly family members. Little Red is coming of age, and so she will face the trials that come with the threshold into adulthood, including facing a big bad, death, and rebirth from the belly of the beast.
In Helpless, Buffy is right on the brink of her 18th birthday, and she is also growing up fast. Like the stage of the hero's journey where the hero must come of age without the support of a mentor figure, Buffy has been abandoned or betrayed by almost every adult figure in her life in the past 2 episodes. One episode prior, her mother, under the influence of the Hansel and Gretel demons that I mentioned a bit earlier, formed a book banning group turned witch hunting group that nearly burned Buffy and fellow bad girls, Willow and Amy, at the stake. Early and Helpless, Buffy's father cancels their annual tradition of taking Buffy to an ice show for her birthday. Buffy, smarting from the abandonment by her father, broaches the subject of the ice show with her surrogate father figure, Giles. She justifies why she isn't too old to enjoy the ice show, gearing up to ask Giles if he would like to join her in her father's place. Giles turns her attention back to the lesson on crystals. As we later learn, the crystal lesson is a ruse so that Giles can hypnotize Buffy and inject her with a compound that temporarily removes her powers. It's all part of a coming-of-age ritual in which a watcher must temporarily deprive their slayer of her power and leave her to fight alone against a monster. The test is for both the slayer and her watcher. Will the watcher be willing to subject their slayer to the theft of their power and to break that bond of trust between them? With the entire Watcher's Council in on the betrayal, Buffy really is alone in the woods these days. In his book, The Trials and Tribulations of Little Red Riding Hood, Jack Zipes analyzed over 500 versions of the Little Red Riding Hood tale from around the world and concluded that the most dominant versions of the story today, which are based on the 17th century retelling by Charles Perrault and the 19th century retelling by the Brothers Grimm, can, quote, be traced to male fantasies about women and sexuality in particular. Charles Perrault and the Brothers Grimm, according to Jack Zipes, transformed an oral peasant folktale about the social initiation of a young woman into a narrative in which the heroine is obliged to bear the responsibility for sexual violation. In other words, what might have once been a coming-of-age story about a young girl becomes a warning about the dangers of predators, in which Little Red herself is blamed for straying from the path.
You can certainly see the sexual harassment in the tale of Grandmother, a version of the story collected in 1885, but which probably reflects much older oral versions of the story. The wolf approaches Little Red in the woods and asks if she prefers the path of pins or the path of needles. Neither sounds like a particularly pleasant journey. Little Red takes one, the wolf takes the other. The wolf reaches Grandmother's house and immediately butchers Grandmother into a hunk of meat and a bottle of blood, which sounds pretty vampiric to me. When Little Red arrives at Grandmother's house, the wolf, in Grandmother's clothing, instructs Little Red to eat some of the meat and drink some of the blood in the cupboard, then demands that she take off each article of her clothing in turn and throw them into the fire, then demands that she climb into bed with him. Only then does Little Red note, with horror, how hairy Grandmother seems to have become. But notably, in this tale from an older peasant tradition, Little Red thinks fast and plays some trickery on the wolf. Realizing she is in bed with a predator, Little Red says she has to go outside to relieve herself. The wolf begrudgingly allows her to go, but only once she ties a rope around her ankle and allows him to hold the other end. Once Little Red is outside, she unties the rope from her ankle, ties it around a plum tree instead, and by the time the wolf comes outside to see why she has not returned, Little Red has made it safely home and latched the door behind her.
Contrast this tale with the version Perrault wrote down for a 17th century aristocratic French audience, in which Little Red, upon climbing into bed with the wolf, is immediately gobbled up. We see a lot of allusions to the sort of sexual innuendos of Little Red Riding Hood in pop culture as well. Think of the Sam and the Pharaohs song,
Hey there, Little Red Riding Hood, you sure are looking good. You're everything a big bad wolf could want. Listen to me. Hey there, Little Red Riding Hood, I don't think little big girls should go walking through these spooky old woods alone.
Those couple of verses encapsulate neatly Jack Zipes' whole thesis about what many Little Red stories become post-Perrault retelling. Little Red is vulnerable in the woods and is desirable to the wolfish speaker, and because she is both desirable and vulnerable, she shouldn't be walking alone in the woods at night. But conversely, she should be walking in the woods with the very wolf who desires her. That listen to me section always gets me, as if a Little Red can't be trusted to think for or look out for herself and needs to listen to someone who is trying very hard to restrain himself and keep on the path and not eat her. Sounds safe to me. In Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale, the telltale red cloak uniforms worn by the handmaidens mark them as reproductive slaves, which quite literally means that they must follow the walking path laid out for them every day as they collect the family's groceries, even down to wearing bonnets that obscure their peripheral vision so that they cannot see outside of the path laid before them. Then they must systematically suffer sexual violation by the commanders who seek to impregnate them. In contrast, the sexless and infertile wives in the book wear blue, an allusion to the Virgin Mary, and since we have these blue-wearing wives and these red cloak-wearing handmaidens, Atwood has presented a very clear visual representation of the Madonna whore binary thinking. Sondheim's Into the Woods similarly portrays the wolf as a predator, an older man who takes advantage of a young, precocious, but naive Little Red. In most versions of the play, the wolf is played by the same actor who plays a womanizing Prince Charming, which reinforces the power dynamic between them. Little Red comes out of this experience scarred, but wiser, as she tells the audience, "When he said, 'Come in,' with that sickening grin, how could I know what was in store? When his teeth were bared, well, I really got scared, well, excited and scared, and he pulled me close, and he swallowed me down a dark, slimy path which lies secrets that I never want to know."
Like a good parable, she ends with a lesson, though it's a nuanced lesson that does not scold or victim blame the way Grimm's fairy tales might. Though scary is exciting, nice is different than good. Now I know, don't be scared, Granny was right, just be prepared. Isn't it nice to know a lot? And a little bit not. Her newfound wisdom has come at the price of her innocence. In the future, she will face wolves, and she will recognize them. She will be prepared. And it's a little bit not nice to suddenly know that you will have to face wolves in your ventures through the woods.
Buffy has faced monsters before, but when she loses her powers, she faces the brunt of sexual harassment in a world that likely feels familiar to many viewers, but which is totally alien to Buffy. At first, she's not prepared for the discrepancy in her physical prowess. She tries to stand up for a bully who harasses Cordelia, only to be thrown to the ground, helpless. As human mortal men harass and threaten her on her way home, Buffy is totally unprepared and off her game. She does what many women do, turn to another woman for support, one who implicitly understands what she is facing without explanation, when she asks Cordelia for a ride home. It's upsetting for Buffy, and honestly unsettling for viewers like myself, to see our powerful avatar subject to the same kind of mundane harassment regularly experienced by so many women or by anyone else who feels vulnerable on their walks home. On top of the disturbing but standard issue harassment from mortals, the vampire Buffy is set to face is the big boss battle that the Watchers have in store for her is the absolute definition of a predator. Even before becoming a vampire, he was a serial killer who targeted women. So the vampire metaphor made literal and then sired back into a metaphor. We hear that he ate his mother, and it never is really clarified whether he ate her before or after he became a vampire. Buffy is nearly spared the trial with the wolfish vampire when Giles warns her, but then the vampire escapes, kidnaps Buffy's mother as bait, and lures Buffy back into the labyrinth. Faced with his taunts, his mind games, and the absolute terror of being in this fight without her powers, Buffy must make a choice about what sort of path she will follow. She follows the path of the little reds who thwart their would-be devourers through sheer wit and tenacity. Little Red is the target of the wolf's trickery, but as I mentioned above, in the older oral folk tales, she outsmarts the wolf and is able to escape, embracing her own inner trickster to do so. Even in versions where Little Red is swallowed whole by the wolf, her story isn't necessarily over. When the huntsman, often read as a surrogate father figure to Little Red, shows up in the Grimm brothers' version of the tale, he cuts open the belly of the wolf, and Little Red and her grandmother emerge in one piece. They have survived the belly of the beast and have re-entered the land of the living, wiser for their experiences. It's a kind of resurrection for Little Red that transforms and reinforces her coming-of-age experience in the tale. Like Snow White or Sleeping Beauty emerging from a death-like sleep, Little Red climbs from the intestinal grave reborn, shed of her past naivete. In some versions of Little Red, they recount her later dealings with wolves and how she swiftly recognizes and outsmarts them. Little Red's nigh death and rebirth has taught her a few tricks of her own. In the Grimm brothers' Little Red Cap, after meeting a wolf in the woods who looked at her in such an evil way that if they had not been out in public, he surely would have gobbled her up right there. Little Red Cap and her grandmother concoct a plan. They boil sausages, and they take the water that they boiled the sausages in and they pour it into a trough out their window. The wolf, who has followed Little Red and stalked her and is now waiting on the roof, smells the sausage water and cranes his neck out so far over the edge that he tumbles forward, falls into the trough, and drowns. Little Red has become something of a monster slayer herself, and the wolves never do her harm again. Buffy has risen from the dead before, but to survive today without her powers, she must become a wary trickster and catch the wolfish vampire in his own game. She will have to think beyond the traditional path. "If you stray from the path, you will lose your way," mocks the vampire in a knowing reference to the wolf, cupping Buffy's face in his hands as she struggles to flee. Buffy is clothed in overalls and pigtails, a childlike outfit, but also one that signifies she is ready to go to work and get her hands dirty. As violin music befitting a fairy tale plays, Buffy gives the vampire the slip by straying from the path, that is, the hallway, and diving headfirst through the laundry chute. "You don't seem to understand your place in all this," says the vampire, one more attempt to shove Buffy into her place. But the trap has already been laid. Noticing the vampire's addiction to his pills, Buffy tricks him into drinking holy water. Like the wolf cut across the belly, the vampire burns from within, slain from his stomach by his would-be devouree. Little Red Buffy Hood is like the heroines of the older peasant versions of the tale, where Little Red spots the danger and saves herself with a trap for the wolf. But there is one more Little Red ending folded in. Just as Buffy and Joyce think that they are safe, Buffy is attacked by a Watcher-made vampire, where the wolfish vampire, prepped to be Buffy's big boss battle, was a feral predator of the night. A Watcher vampire symbolizes a patriarchal system that seeks to keep Buffy in line on the path that they have outlined for her, until it leads to her own death. This time, Buffy is saved by intervention by Giles, her own huntsman-like surrogate father. Giles, a former instrument of the Watcher's Council, is a fitting hero to oppose the vampire Watcher. It's a reminder of what he should have been doing from the start, defending and shielding Buffy from the destructive ritual that the Watchers demanded of her. Little Red is a story with aesthetic unity, but with many different interpretations, as many as there are conflicting expectations for how women and girls should behave. Stick to the path, or defy the path? Wear the cloak with pride, or discard it? The path of pins, or the path of needles? In Little Red, is she a hapless victim of a shocking circumstance, an agent in her own destruction, or just a young woman facing and learning to navigate the standard issue perils that most women face? Wolves, after all, are common. When Little Red survives the tale, she is sure to face them again. But I hope she does it by walking in a path that doesn't feel like pins and needles, on a path that helps her grow in her own strength. The Watchers Council fires Giles because of his fatherly love for Buffy, which they say is of no use to the cause, and then they congratulate Buffy on passing the test. Buffy responds with the quiet ferocity of an alpha wolf protecting her pack.
Bite me.
As she has seethed to the council, they let a monster loose, and it went after her mother, not to mention the utter violation of sapping her bodily strength. Colorful girl, the Watcher replies. Buffy is learning every day that the best way to protect herself and her loved ones is to chart her own path, wherever it leads. And thank you for joining me on Fairy Tales and Fangs, and I would love to hear your thoughts on Little Red Riding Hood, other interpretations of Helpless, or anything else you want to share in the comments below. Until next time.